Okay, and welcome to the Monday, August 3rd, 2015 meeting of the Planning Commission. We are hereby called to order.
Oh, I have to get my agenda.
Miss G.
I'm here.
Mr. Mix.
Here.
Ms. Rogers?
Here.
Ms. Teets? Here. Mr. Wodisca?
Here.
Mr. John and Mr. Rankin are absent this evening.
Move to adopt the agenda.
I so move.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Outstanding. Receipt of petitions for items not on the agenda. These are on the agenda. Okay, anyone else?
I lost my agenda.
You're on the agenda.
For items not on the agenda, though. See, your work session is not on the agenda.
You're right. You're right. See, that's why I hesitated, but
That's a former planning
you're
chairman.
you're two steps ahead of me.
Thank you. Keith Kirsten, 1015 Birch Street, Public Church, speaking on behalf of the Village Society. Thank you. The item in your work session, of course, is the dealing with paper streets and other city properties that are not designated for current use. And we're very glad that staff and the Planning Commission has taken this issue up. It's been an issue for 30 years or more. We think we have solved it at times through understandings and through policies, and without code or without some other official designation, it turns out it's not the case. Once you get a turnover of new staff or some other change occurs, then the memory and the understanding of it is lost. And then we end up with new issues and incidents related to paper streets or undesignated land. So we wrote initially to the Commission and others last fall, the letters dated October, and asked that this be undertaken in order to finally put some clear guidelines and policy around it, either through code or through the designation of the property in a different way. Now, I do understand one of the challenges is there's only one entity, and the city is the city. And so it's a little bit hard to argue, but we are asking, say, that they have a guardian with the city, that maybe it'd be under the Parks and Recreation Department. But when it comes to titling land, that may be a difference without significant meaning. So it might require some code in order to do it. Right now, the sale of property is supposed to come through the Planning Commission, and the sale and disposal through the Planning Commission and the City Council. In these recent cases, that didn't happen. You all didn't see it, and Council didn't see it. It happened by staff, and it happened through an easement, not through a change of title. So that leaves a gray area. So, I mean, if I want to use property, I don't necessarily need a sale of property. You can give me an easement to use something for 99 years or more. So you can see how that could get complex. I think the code could be tightened up so that any easement onto city property is also considered a Planning Commission action or council action. One has to watch that. You don't want to do every utility easement that comes through the city, because I'm sure there are dozens and hundreds of them throughout the year. But there has to be some way to take what's property that's undesignated and not being used at the current time, to have a public review and a real decision process beyond what's in place now. And that's what we're asking for you all to consider, and that the staff has really put together some materials for you to consider during your work session.
So I had a question about your letter.
Sure.
If that's okay. So the obstacle in the past to the paper streets, going back to the time when I was on the Recreation and Parks Board, had partly to do with a lack of vision what you necessarily would do with these, but mostly it was just who would then maintain it. You know, if it becomes a thing that is other than what it is now, which is, you know, whatever, like who's maintaining it, whatever. And so your implication in your letter is that this become recreation and parks. Does that mean they mow it? Does that mean, I mean, it's sort of, again, that's where these get put into, no one's really has a vision for them necessarily.
That's right. I think there are 3 designations. So I think one of them are already linear parks, and that is like the Cherry Street Midvale Trail. That was a paved walking trail. It had city lights down it that the city paid the bill for, and the city parks and recs mowed the grass. That should have already been designated under Parks and Recs. So I think we need some designation that's not quite a park, but is a city designated trail. And you have a couple of those around the city that you could move into that classification. And then there's a secondary classification, and that is one that is for potential future use. So why even save them? Well, we don't know today what utilities they're going to be in 50 years or 100 years. Who would have thought of cable access television, 60 years ago? Who would have preserved spaces to place them? We now have issues going around with drone delivery and autopiloted cars coming on the horizon. You can see that 50 or 100 years from now, utilities may be a very different delivery mechanism than we have now. And the city needs places in reserve in order to take care of those things when they occur. One of the things we all know about right now is the need for stormwater detention. There's places all over the city where the neighborhoods are complaining that the stormwater is a problem or they have flooding. And these little small pieces of land could be those places where those cisterns go in order to have the stormwater detention. So the point is that a jurisdiction has future needs and that it shouldn't lock itself in by giving away or selling or giving easements on property so it's no longer available for its designated use in the future.
Check. Okay. Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Thurston.
Thank you. We appreciate you doing this. It's not an easy subject.
Oh, we like those the best.
Right.
It isn't? I showed up for the easies. Maybe it's not too late. We can redo this. Okay. Item 5, old business. West Broad Street Small Area Plan. How do we want to proceed?
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, I just wanted to mention I'm going to be upstairs with City Council and the Town Council Vienna work session. Paul Stoddard is going to be running this presentation to you. Apologize for not being able to be with you tonight. We did give you out copies of a DVD that we put together, which has all of the approved plans that the city has approved for small area plans. The Virginia Tech plans. There are the videos that have the flyovers and as well as our presentation last month at the Virginia APA conference in Norfolk on the small area planning process for the city. One of your members, Quafo John, was at the conference and we enjoyed meeting and talking with him. But we wanted you all to have this. It's a convenient way to have a lot of information. We hope you find it useful. And it also has the presentation, the PowerPoint we made to the groups down there. We gave these away to a number of people throughout the state and want to make sure you all had your own copies. But rather than having lots of 100+ page documents, they're all on here on the disk. And also we included a copy of our monthly report from last month, which has a lot of interesting information up front of just what happened over the year. A lot of statistics. We can talk about those at another time. But I did want to apologize for not being able to be here with you in person, but we'll be upstairs, and I'm sure Paul and Ms. G will take care of things very well for you.
How long does it take us to watch this?
Oh, it's well, the plan is just in there, so you can flip from page to page. So you can click on North Washington, South Washington, or downtown.
Oh, it's not a video. You put it
No.
in your computer and
So all the documents are there. The plans that were done by Virginia Tech. There are videos that we did, which are on there, the YouTube videos, PowerPoints. So it's a lot of information in one place, and we hope you find it useful. Thank you all.
How do you want to proceed?
What I'd like to do is go through these few slides that we've got here. I'm going to work on the other screens in a minute.
Define few.
I think it's 20 slides.
Oh.
And the idea is that these slides highlight the new information that the Planning Commission hasn't seen before. It really centers on the concept chapter, and then after that, after the staff presentation, we could open up to the public hearing. We could do Planning Commission question and answer, and then ultimately looking for sort of Planning Commission action following that.
Okay.
All right. There are copies of the slides that I believe were handed out at the dais. And if those are usable by the Planning Commission, I'd like to ask you all to use those. We've got it loaded on that screen, but to load it on that screen, I'd have to climb over the tables. So I think with this mechanism, everybody can see what's going on. Okay. And then before we jump into the slides, I want to sort of also draw your attention to something that was distributed at the dais. It's an updated staff report. And in particular, what's been updated is the proposed motion. And the proposed motion sort of leads into the focus of the presentation, which is, one, these small area plans are called for by the comprehensive plan. And then two, this area, this West Broad Street area, is really about making connections. The slides will talk about just how much of the city's population, those residential neighborhoods, are adjacent to this area, and where West Broad Street today is a barrier for those people. This should really be a connection and an opportunity for people to access neighborhood services. So it's a north-south connection. It's also an east-west connection. That on the west side of the city, you've got potential for major redevelopment around the West Falls Church Metro. On the east side, you've got the planned areas in downtown, South Washington, North Washington, those core entertainment areas and the core commercial areas. So understanding that sort of message about connection, I'm going to jump into the slides. So as I mentioned, the comprehensive plan calls for small area plans in the various planning opportunity areas. In order, the city tackled North Washington Street, South Washington Street, then the downtown area plan. And now the city is looking at two planning areas in combination, the West Broad Street corridor and then the what was previously called the Village section, which are now both highlighted in purple, magenta on the slides, and labeled number 6. We're on slide number 2. Moving to slide number 3, this slide shows just how much of the population is adjacent to this planning opportunity area. It's 8,000, let's see, it's it's almost 9,000 people, which means it's more than 2/3 of the city's population lives adjacent to this planning opportunity area. And today, the ability to sort of connect those neighborhoods across the street is severely limited because of the sort of infrequent pedestrian crossings, and the crossings that do exist are pretty difficult to navigate. And so really this West Broad Street is a barrier instead of a focus of neighborhood and city activity. And like I said, this is also sort of an east-west connection where you've got economic activity potential for it at the West Broad Street area. I'm sorry, the West Falls Church Metro Station, and then you've got sort of planned economic activity in the downtown and the South Washington Street area. So this also needs to serve that purpose of what goes on between those areas and where sort of West Falls Station and the core entertainment area are about catering to that sort of outside population. This can really be something that's more about the inside population. What are the neighborhood services that this population needs? As I mentioned, other plans that the city has worked on the next slide. North Washington completed in 2012, downtown in 2014, South Washington 2013, and so those 3 plans really defined a vision for North Washington, and this plan is now extending that vision, setting up a vision for West Broad Street. This area, although it's often sort of, I think, not thought of as a place where a lot of activity is going on, it's actually been sort of the hottest spot for redevelopment activity. As the next slide shows, this is where the Flower Building was constructed, the Hilton Garden Inn, the Broadway, the Spectrum, the Reed, the Byron. a lot of the major developments that have happened in the city recently have happened in this corridor. There's interest here. And there's also sort of ongoing activity that sort of caters to local populations, things like the Broaddale Shopping Center and the West End Plaza. But there are also cultural uses. This isn't just an economic corridor. It's about the sort of the culture of the community with things like St. James Church that figures very prominently in this corridor. The planning process to date, what's been done to get the draft to the state it's in today. The effort began with a kickoff meeting with the public, June 2014. There was a public meeting at the church, February 2015, that followed the normal sort of format with an introduction to the area from staff, breakout discussions with community members. Planning Commission work session in April 2015, feedback. We reached out to staff, reached out to liaisons from boards and commissions and asked that boards and commissions provide feedback on the plan. There was a joint work session with council and the Planning Commission on June. And then here we are today, August 3rd, coming back to the Planning Commission with those edits. Major changes that were made in response to the Planning Commission work session and then the City Council and the Planning Commission joint work session, as well as sort of minor changes along the way. And then the major change is the addition of a concept chapter, which I think is chapter 3. And I'm going to walk through. You? The concept chapter?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think it's new tonight for you all.
No, I understand that.
Yeah.
We had no input.
So the concept chapter, I think, is really intended, and at least when I read it, it seems to be sort of a collection of everything that's in the other chapters, where different pieces are sort of parceled out into different chapters, whether it's land use or zoning or mobility. The concept chapter is really a summation of the information that's sort of spaced throughout the existing document. And so the sort of key concepts that make that up are things like respectful building design, making sure that the design works for the adjacent neighborhoods, things like step downs and massing, innovative development, looking for practices that maybe haven't been used in the city before, but things like incorporating stormwater infrastructure, shared parking agreements, LEED certified buildings. And looking at connections. Again, connections figure prominently in the plan. Developing nodes of land use where they seem to be already growing, sort of supporting those things. So office and hotel seem to be co-locating around the intersection of Oak and West Broad, so let's sort of move that along. You've got retail sort of focusing where the Broaddale and the Harris Teeter are going together, so let's focus on those. Sort of building recognizable places that people can go. And then also talking about sort of, there's a long-term goal, but what are the short-term actions that the city could take to get there and realize the vision? And so then there are a number of concept illustrations in the chapter, and they talk about sort of, these are all things that are potential, and to put a possibility or an impression or a visualization of what these words are talking about. So the concept shows up on the next page. The idea, it's a color-coded map with the tan being the existing buildings, and then the blue buildings being sort of potential infill around what's there today. In some cases replacing the existing buildings, but in a lot of cases sort of working in and around those existing footprints. And then, as often happens with the small area plans, there's a desire to sort of concentrate parking to make it available on a shared use. And those things are highlighted in that sort of brown coffee color. And so if we move into the next slide, which again is color-coded, this time with sort of greens and blues. Title of the map is Concept Building Height. The idea is to have a variety of building heights here, as low as 1 to 2 stories, and then as high as 7 to 8. Most of the buildings that are called for 7 to 8 are existing buildings, things like the Spectrum, or the office building at the Oak, or the already approved Rushmark project at 301 West Broad. And then the idea is to sort of mirror those, so across the street from the 301 West Broad, does it make sense to have a building opposite that sort of mirrors it so you have a balanced street? And then another place where height might be possible is on the western edge of the corridor, but you would put that height up on West Broad Street, and then before it gets to the neighborhoods down to Ellison Street, you would bring that back down into the 3 to 4 story range so that it's about the same height as the housing across the way. And also you could change the frontage of those things so that it's a townhouse sort of residential feel, so that you've got sort of similar buildings across the street from one another.
All the other buildings are lower. Particularly if it's in and when I drove past there tonight, I thought about that building being 7 or 8 stories high.
Use the microphone, please.
I'm sorry.
I thought about that building being 7 to 8 stories high, and it reinforced all of my concerns about canyon effect. So this is not something that we've talked about in the past.
Mhm.
This is not something we agreed would be in there, and I'm just wondering how it showed up tonight.
Not a very big parcel.
No.
I think in part it's looking at sort of what does it take if the Stratford Lodge were to come in for a redevelopment or someone wanted to redevelop that site. I think the Stratford Lodge has been there for a long time, and I think sort of people are wondering sort of what could be done with that site. And one of the things that has to be taken into consideration is in order to get that redevelopment, you have to make it worth the while, because someone's going to have to buy out. You all know this, but someone's going to have to buy out that land, and then what do they have to do in order to get a return?
In the past, there have been several proposals that they bought the 3 parcels. And I just think that if we're indicating that that can be 7 or 8 stories high, that's the way they'll go. I don't think I mean, it's different if they come back asking for it for a special exception.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think we should designate it that way.
Well, maybe it would be helpful to us if you explained the benefit of the concept section.
Sure.
And why so slightly frustrating, we haven't seen it before.
Mm-hmm.
But just highlighting what benefit this is as to the larger document. I mean, we have later questions maybe for you on this, but I don't understand how this is good for us to have this.
Sure. So,
irrespective of the fact that maybe it helps juice the berry for the Stratford Lodge, which I don't know why we care about that necessarily as a specific property. I'd love to see them do well, but I don't know generally why this is good for us.
Just one question of clarification. Even if we show this on here, if it's still going to need a special exception.
Correct.
So regardless, there will be a special
But
exception.
it's changing it, Melissa. It's changing it from the OD, which is
Yeah,
a
but-
totally different thing.
No, I
It's
understand
taking
that,
but-
one little
but I just-
parcel and
not-
not rezoning it.
I'm not
But
suggesting
it's-
that should be the colors there, but I do think this reflects what we told them in the last couple of work sessions we had where we said we wanted more specific information about height on here because it was more general before. This is actually, I went back and looked at my notes, and this is this is what we asked for. We asked for more idea of height. Now that doesn't mean we shouldn't say to them, like, I'm not sure the Stratford end parcel's big enough to be that large and have it work out well. So we can say, you know what, we think that's wrong, and that should probably be more of a teal color.
Okay, well, so I was trying to avoid specifically going, color by color by color. I mean, we could do that. But I just generally, because everything's going to go through the special exception process, how is this beneficial to us?
So this is sort of a follow-on product or a similar product to what happened with the downtown small area plan. That the downtown small area plan had a lot of ideas that people liked. That idea of that shared space and that the alley that's open to pedestrian activity, you bring sidewalk dining into that place. And people liked the ideas, but they had a hard time sort of interacting with them in the format of the document itself. And so the concept chapter there was used to sort of bring the highlights to the plan and sort of try to make the key planning elements more accessible to people who maybe didn't want to read the entire document. And so that's really what this concept chapter is about, is making those key elements in the plan more immediately sort of readable. So when people ask sort of, what's the height going to be? What kind of uses are going to go where? What are the pedestrian accesses going to be? That's what the concept chapter is about.
Well, but I think it's comparing two different things, because in the downtown area, part of this was what could be, what was, this is not correct English, but what's consolidatable, and how could you do something different if you consolidate. So there was a different reason to come at it than there may be, at least as I read this, with the colors.
Okay.
Does that make sense to you? So in other words, this is a two-story building, but if it's assembled with, you know, one or two other pieces, all of a sudden we may be looking at a totally different type of development. That was the reason to do it in the downtown. I'm not sure it applies here, at least as I read this.
Yeah, some of the, well, that's certainly right. You want to sort of explore those scenarios of what happens based on consolidation or not. And some of this color coding is based on sort of looking at where are you likely to be able to consolidate, where are you not likely to be able to consolidate, and then what are the older buildings versus the newer buildings, because the older a building is, the more likely it is to come up for redevelopment. And so some of the things that are in here as the taller buildings are those items that are a little bit older, and there's more likely to be developer interest on those things.
Okay. All right, well.
I just want to comment. When I looked at this, I thought this really reflected what we'd asked for. That we wanted to look at this corridor as one that there wouldn't be a lot of consolidation, because some of these lots are very narrow. And we wanted to be more specific about height. And I thought this totally reflected what we asked for, that we wanted something that was a little bit more specific.
Well, we might have asked to be more specific, but we didn't ask for 7 or 8 stories.
No, I understand.
Well,
but I think
so
they
you just said
that.
something that contradicted it. I mean, I think you sort of hit the nail right on the head. This doesn't actually reflect what would be the actual buildings in the same way, because, so for example, as you said, you know, this parcel's probably too small to build an 8-story building.
It is. Well, I think that I understand that they went and looked at it and tried to conceive of what could you do there, and they were looking, well, we could reflect the building across the street. I think we all agree that we don't agree that's a good concept. But I do like that down where there are some shallower lots, that they clearly put them in the 3 to 4 and the 1 to 2 stories. That reflected exactly what we asked for. So I think you can't expect staff to get every single thing right that we talked about, and I think that one of the things we're saying right now is that for that parcel, it should not, that's just not the right height for it. Not with that one single parcel. There's no way.
The other thing is the Christian Science Reading Room. That came up when, I think it was called the Madison. Came in, and it was that whole block of little blocks.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Right. Well, and I think that right now they're
There's
showing
the whole block
us,
of Little Falls.
yeah, they're showing it left alone. And so this is what happens when you leave it alone.
Okay, well,
That was talked about moving it at the time.
Okay, we'll have time for questions later.
Right.
I just thought we may as well hit this one while we were on that slide.
No, it's excellent.
If that's okay.
Yeah, no, that's excellent.
And so then the concept chapter sort of goes further, where that's sort of a, gosh, I don't know how many feet up I am at this point. It's probably only like, I don't know, like 1,000 feet. So if we come down to like the, I don't know, like the 200-foot view, this is looking at it sort of block by block and what's possible. And so here's the highlight of that block that we were just talking about, of sort of potential redevelopment at the Stratford, then some sort of library expansion and or sort of public parking facility. And then, so with those 2 redevelopments, there might also be an opportunity through agreement with landholders to open up a sort of mid-block access. This is an access that's used routinely by people moving between the Broaddale Shopping Center and City Hall, which is to sort of make our way through the parking lots and across the street at Park Avenue, but it's not anything that's formal. And so the idea is, how can we open up those accesses? A lot of the blocks in the city, just because of the history of the city, are all somewhere in like the 600 to 800 foot length. And generally, when you're trying to make things ped friendly, they want to be about 300 to 500 feet. And so some of this is how do you split up those blocks, not necessarily opening them up to automobile access because there may not be the space for it or even desirable from a community standpoint, but opening up ped access so that people do have better choices of how they can get around. And also on the right side of the picture and the left side of the picture, carrying through that idea of mid-block crossings sort of halfway between Broad and Park to connect to the core entertainment area and bringing those across the street. And then in the 300 block here we've got the color-coded images again with building heights, and so for the most part this is what's there today or approved in the case or under construction in the case of 301. But then looking at sort of those potential redevelopments at the Stratford, maybe moving up to 7 or 8, but it sounds like the sense of the group is going for something different, and then the calling out sort of the library expansion. Next block over, the 400 block, again a mid-block pedestrian crossing being highlighted on the north side, and this is also a nice job, nice opportunity to sort of put a connection on the end of what is today a dead-end sidewalk, at least bringing those folks that are on the north side of the street across the street to where they can access the complete sidewalk on the south side. And looking at redevelopment on the corner there of Broad and North Virginia today, that's a gas station, but could something else go in its place? And then on the south side of Broad, that's the Inns of Virginia, but could you fit sort of an additional sort of building chunk around that that would expand on what's there today? That would be a nice way to add sort of a completion to that street wall. There are a lot of places where this happens on Broad where there's sort of buildings on each parcel, but they're sort of separated from one another in a left-right sense. And so from the pedestrian experience, there's a lot of dead space. Is there a way to fill that in?
I love the park.
Looking at building heights, on the south side of 7, this is an opportunity to sort of scale down the development, keeping it at that sort of 3 to 4 story range where it abuts residential property, and then building it up where it's sort of moving away from that. And then at the corner looking for something a little bit taller where you've got the streets to act as buffers to the nearby uses. At the 5 to 800 block, there are a lot of pieces in here where things could be filled in. Along the south side of the street, opportunities for sort of office and residential, office above retail. And then on the north side of the street, looking for a way to maybe expand the Hilton Garden Inn. As I understand it, that hotel is often at capacity, so they may be looking for a way to get additional rooms. And so is there an opportunity to use the space that's maybe underused today at the corner of Oak and Broad, and then filling in the pieces that face onto Broad, but making sure to do that in a way that's consistent with the character of Park Avenue. And that means sort of generally keeping the buildings along Park in that sort of 3 to 4 story range, so that they're about the same height as things that are across the street from them, and putting the taller buildings, the 5 and 6 story buildings, and on the south side, 7 and 8, fronting onto Broad. Concepts for St. James. St. James is likely to sort of stay for a long time. And yes. So what can we do to sort of enhance the area around St. James? So formalizing that mid-block crossing that they use to get between the church and the school. And then on the south side of the street, opening up sort of, maybe opening up a plaza that's directly adjacent to the entrance for St. James School, so that those two things sort of mirror each other across the street and you get some synergy in terms of your urban design. And then maybe looking at something that's maybe a slightly smaller scale redevelopment. You've got smaller format buildings, and maybe there's an opportunity to get some sort of interconnected parcels as surface parking is developed. And so using that sort of lower format development in this area, because St. James already exists and it's a fairly low intensity use in terms of its heights and its setbacks and its open space, And immediately to the south of the area is a lot of residential use. So how do those buildings sort of fit within that scope? And it can be a sort of a 3 to 4 story redevelopment. Then at Broad and West, Mason Row is sort of going through a very intense design process now between sort of council, planning commission, other boards and commissions, the community, the developers, staff. So there's a lot going on now with that area. And so the idea with this plan is to sort of appreciate that that's a more sort of involved process and just leave that to its own devices instead of trying to use this plan as some sort of leverage for one side or the other. And then along sort of the other side of the street, what do you do with sort of the plaza that's the shopping plaza that's there today? And then what about something like the Taco Bell and the sort of that old shopping center that's sort of sideways oriented with sort of its short end on Broad and then its long end facing the parking lot? And so again, it's that same idea of sort of bringing the density and the height down as it gets closer to the residential districts, leaving the taller portions of the building up on Broad. So then follow-up items, what would happen sort of immediately after adopting this plan? I think as Commissioner Teets said, that adopting the plan doesn't mean the city is going to go out and sort of buy buildings and tear them down and construct them the next day. This is really a guide for sort of the public, the government, the planning commission staff, the community, to, it's a lens through which to sort of view development proposals from the private side as they come in. So as the private side comes forward and says, I have an opportunity to buy these parcels, take down this building, put up something else instead, the public can look at it and say, well, is that consistent with what's in the plan? You know, does it sort of work? Do we need to make some changes? How does it work? But follow-up items in terms of planning, looking at sort of updates and tweaks to the West Broad Street streetscape standards, something to modernize those. Streetscape standards for Park Avenue, which is called out as a great street in the comprehensive plan. Looking at a way to maybe streamline rezoning. So maybe put forward guidelines for what it is that the city's looking for in these development proposals. And if a developer can meet those expectations, can the approval process be streamlined? And then something that often comes up, sort of consolidating surface parking so that people are sharing and we can reduce the number of curb cuts. They disrupt sort of the street experience, the pedestrian experience, and they generally detract from sort of streetscape because that means you can't fit in as many trees as you want to, you can't fit in street lights like you wanted to. And then short-term actions. These are sort of physical changes that could be made in the environment. Simple things like going out and just washing the street. Right now, the brick sidewalks generally don't get washed, and so is that something we can do to just sort of refurbish the area? Where minor repairs in the streetscape need to be made, painting the lamps, installing wayfinding signage so that people know where they're going, adding bicycle parking, making minor changes to intersection geometry, things like curb extensions that can reduce pedestrian crossing and also help define what is and is not a parking area. And then other things that have been talked about, things like metered parking, and could that metered parking revenue be turned immediately into streetscape improvements? That's been a popular tool in other communities that you say, oh, we're going to install parking meters, and everyone says, boo, and then you say, we're going to use it to improve the streetscape, and then they say, yay. So having a discussion about that. Looking at refreshing crosswalks, looking at how Spring Street is working, and opening up those pedestrian connections. In terms of schedule, tonight's August 3rd, Planning Commission public hearing, meeting, and a requested action, and then looking to September for a City Council meeting, a walking tour, and final adoption if it stays on schedule. I think that's the last slide. Thank you.
Okay, so we have a speaker slip. I'm going to open this up to public comments. So we have a speaker slip from Lisa.
Baroxis.
Help me.
Baroxis.
Baroxis. Oh, I thought it was a Y, so I was walking down a totally different road there.
Do I have to come up there?
Yes, ma'am. And you have to speak in the mic, or the guy who's in that room will come out.
It's actually very friendly to have a seat up there.
Turned on for me, thank you.
But the canary comes out. Hi, I'm Lisa Brooks. It's from 301 Grove Avenue, and I originally came because I wanted to support the email that Kathy Kleiman sent you last night expressing how much we do not want a public restroom in that strip of green space between Grove Avenue and West Street, which is kind of designed here where they want to put a train station and all that little park down there, and they want to get rid of all the green spaces down there and put paved. This is the old draft. I don't have the new one.
It's pretty much the same.
Yeah, and we just don't like this. I do not want to be turning onto my street and seeing a public restroom as I drive 100 yards up to my house. It's going to cause a lot of problems. We do have some homeless people in the area, and we're afraid that those public restrooms will be used for shelter at times. But then after listening to this presentation tonight, I have this little stream of consciousness, so it's not really, I'm going to put questions out there. Do not expect answers directly, just these are my thoughts that came out. If we get rid of another gas station on Broad Street, where do we buy fuel in the city? You talk about redeveloping things. We've already going to lose, if Mason Road goes through or another development comes through, we're going to lose the Sunoco. Now we're going to get rid of the Exxon too. Another thought that came to my mind was on Park Avenue. When he was showing the slide for Park Avenue, it appears that the plan is to grow that first whole block from Broad Street back to Park Avenue, and you're really encroaching on residential homes at that point in time. And I don't know that that is the right thing to do. I realize that half, 2/3 of Park Avenue are already business, but they're low one-story house-type businesses, not 2 and 3 and 4 stories high. And will another public hearing be slotted into that time frame that's up there? So not everyone has access to a computer. Not everyone has time to go up and dig through 200 pages of documentation, but they would like to see a presentation of some sort before things come their way. And I think that was it. And that was it. So thanks.
Thank you. Rohini Winters.
Thank you. I missed, Lisa, do we need to repeat our address and all that? Yes. Okay, Rohini Winters, 324 Grove Avenue. I'm here also to endorse the email that was sent by Kathy Kleiman last night for the residents of Grove Avenue, and express my desire to not have a public restroom on West Street as part of a redevelopment small area plan that I thought was Broad Street, but turns out it goes all the way back to Park Avenue, and includes the WNOD trail that we've been talking about for a year now, and no one has ever mentioned to me as an advocate for my neighborhood that, oh, well, you might want to look at the train station plan to pave over all these, green foliage areas that are going to face Mason Row instead of keeping it green like you've been asking us to do on the other side of the street. So I'm a little offended. I also am going to speak to the process right now because I didn't see any big yellow signs on that portion of the neighborhood. And we had, upwards of 50 people out for the Blue Moon on Friday night. That would have been a great opportunity to discuss, if we'd known there was a public hearing tonight, to discuss their views. They came from West End, they came from farther than that. They came from south of Broad, Poplar Street Drive, and we didn't know that this was looming. And I think there's a problem with the city's process. I'll just be flat out honest. We didn't get mailers, we didn't get anything that said the train station that could have gone during the West End Park redevelopment and on that area that butts up to the car wash could have been a great location for a train station and public restrooms and concessions and whatever entrance to the West End. But we want to put it at the end of this great street that's in the middle of a neighborhood that we've been talking about for months. And people seem to not be hearing what the concern is of the residents. So if you would please look at it holistically instead of piecemealing us these little projects. And I understand a pocket park is something, but I don't really know what the concept is right now that I'm being asked to comment on.
Keith Thurston.
Thank you. Keith Thurston, 1015 Birch Street, speaking on behalf of the Village Society. We had sent a letter on the initial small area plans when they came through. And just picking up on the subject that's just spoken on, we also had indicated that the location of the reproduction train station would have been best suited for West End Park on Broad Street, that this location being sited at the end of Park Avenue is consuming, turning basically what's going to be a very busy, confusing intersection with the new development and has green space there, and turning it into Hardscape Plaza, which is not going to be advantageous. So I think another location, we had indicated then that another location was preferable. We're somewhat confused on the transitional zoning, that there's some discussion in here, but I don't understand where we're substituting transitional zoning for some other type of height control. And the degree that transition is now all the way down Park Avenue should remain that way unless there is a notification for rezoning, if you will. On the process too, these small area plans, because they're not treated as comp plan reviews, is kind of bypassing the formal public notification process. And that may be fine if these are just advisory and have no force of comp plan, but they're not. They are citing the comp plan, and I'm fearful that later on it'll be said, well, it's in the small area plan, therefore it's part of the comp plan. So for that reason, I think the comments made about process are important ones. Along the same line, I call your attention to 6-24, which has to do with streetscape and lighting. The Village Society has said that we would like the streetscape to be handled as a totality, as a holistic plan, and not to piecemeal changes out of it. So what this is doing is advocating the elimination, the change of the streetscape plan from the Broad Street plan. Now, that's already happened on an incident basis, isn't that, in front of the Hilton Garden Inn? And I think if you take a look at that and made a determination whether that was successful or not, you'd have a hard time coming up to say that what resulted in that was a good idea. We should have stuck with this West Broad Street plan that we had. It would have been a much better outcome. So we are concerned that streetscape plans need to be very broad, very encompassing, and in one place, and not piecemealed in different places. Likewise, the lighting on Broad Street is part of the streetscape plan. Now, this is going ahead and given the go-ahead for replacing the lighting with LED lights. The color and luminosity of those lights was a long discussed and a long planned decision process for the city. It was part of the Broad Street plan. And the placement of the poles, the foot candles of output, and the color were all very well debated and very well considered. We understood there was to be an experiment with LED lighting in the West End, just to put up a couple of lights so that we could take a look at that. We've been told that that's been done, and this is moving ahead on changes that are kind of outside of what should be a normal process. On the bus shelters, we congratulate the staff on that. We've been asking for standardized bus shelters long to provide a consistent look for the city and not to have developers put up bus shelters in front of their own buildings. Where that's been done around the Four Eyes, around the Mad Fox, I think you'd see that that's not an outcome that we want to advocate for the future, that bus shelter should come down when the replacements come in and become standardized shelters along Broad. Thank you very much.
Mike Winters.
Good evening, Mike Winters, 324 Grove Avenue. Not really going to talk about Broad Avenue per se, or Broad Street, that's fine, but west. When you look at west across from Mason Row, we've been talking to the Mason Row for a while about the fact they want to put up, 6 stories and have a loading zone and have trash bay and all that. We said that isn't what fits across from the WNOD, that really, and a strip of parking. And it looks like, some of those are going to be addressed. And one of the things that had been brought up is instead of having the interior chasm, the public space that they talked about, why not open that up to the green space right in front of you? Well, now it looks like instead of kind of integrating, what's going to happen across the street is maybe a public restroom, which an odd place to put a restroom across the street from a 6-story tall building. That's fine if that's what is needed. But if you really want to, I guess what we're trying to get at is if there's an integration here, you take Mason Row, have their public space open up to the WNOD. And then and you leave that alone. There's nothing that needs to be done with this beautiful green space, and there's nowhere else on the WNOD that you can stop and have a public gathering. And rather than inside, the little plazas that we have accessible to us or inside of Mason Row, you could, for, events a couple times a year, block off the street and have a major regional event. I mean, there's stuff you could do if you connect these two things, but you can't do it if, as was mentioned by the others in Rohini, if these things are kind of going down separate trails. WNOD is a fantastic piece, and to turn that into something that I think there's an opportunity there to try to develop what is probably going to happen with Mason Row and tie it into the WOD into a wonderful public gathering spot. And that is unlike anything else we have for miles around. Thanks.
Okay, so there are no more public comments. So we'll close the public hearing portion of this. Planning Commission questions for Mr. Stoddard.
Well, can I have a second round? So I just do my first round? I actually sat down and read this thing for the second time all the way through. But anyway, be that as may, I just want to point out that anything with the train station in this document, it says this section is for discussion purposes only. A WNOD trail entry plaza will ultimately need to be a discussion among the public, city officials, and other stakeholders. And so that is a rather controversial piece that's included in part of this, and it is also referred to probably in the bike OD trail also, and that the streetscape revision will be made very carefully with the Tree Commission, Planning Commission, and all those necessary involved. There were some other just corrections in it that, I could, for instance, the Broadway in section 2/8 is the far is 1.76, and then another section is stated as 2.5, the highest in the city. So it can't be correct. 422 is a terrible picture of Broaddale. Looks like a ghost. And then that public park zoning, I think that's something that we really need to get on for the whole thing. But I was rather interested in the amount of coverage given to in this document as a whole, given to the possibility of the park on Broad, and all the constant references to it throughout this document.
What was it?
It's where Beato's is.
Yeah. Oh, a pocket park, yeah.
Yeah, the one tree park, one pole park. But yeah, but I was really, there was a lot of stuff in here about that, but there might be a couple of other things, but anyway.
Well, no, I was going to say, I thought that having the pocket park concept in there was a good one, because at some point we may have to address this orphan parcel. And so we might as well start thinking about it now. My husband and I used to think, and we wondered if you could put a weird spiral garage in there. Because, you know, in DC they have them where it's a spiral going up and a spiral going down. And we're like, that would fit in there. But I wanted to say, I actually appreciated the concept chapter. When I got the packet, I was glad to see it because I thought, to me, it really referenced everything that we had said to you about how we didn't want to have the height not really be set for especially some of those smaller parcels. And we wanted to recognize that we really didn't think you were going to get a strip of those houses that are businesses now and pull them together and make something big out of it. You just can't do it, especially those where they're so shallow that they're right on people's backyards. And so I appreciate the concept thing, and I understood the purpose of it. You know, on this West Street train station, I personally don't think we're ever really going to do it in the next decade or maybe even 20 years. I thought it was an interesting concept of having a place that welcomed people from out of the city into the city, a place they could stop and get air on their bike. My son and I used to bike to West End Park quite a bit because we don't have a park in our neighborhood, and it would have been nice to have a bathroom there because when you have a 7-year-old who has to go to the bathroom, and there's no McDonald's now, there's really nowhere to go to the bathroom there.
Now there'll be no gas stations.
And there may be no gas stations. But I think well, and that's a good point too. No one's saying the Exxon should go away. We don't own that property. We have no idea what that owner would do or not do with that property. But anyway, I did think, I understand the issues with the West Street train station. I think it's a nice concept. I don't think it ultimately is going to go where it's suggested because the land isn't appropriately graded there anyway. But I do think it doesn't hurt to have the concept in there. And in the plan itself, it talks about where there are similar areas in Vienna and Percyville where people can gather. I don't think it's a bad concept to have in there that we should have something like this. I actually thought maybe it's something we could go on the other side of Broad, but I think the reason that it's located where it is part of the problem is if you have something like this and it's not visible, then people don't really use it. And so there is a visibility on West Street that you would have that you wouldn't have if it was in the interior. So I think that's why the concept's it. But this is not in stone. This is probably, we're a long way away from this. It would take a lot of money. We don't have that money right now in our budget. So I think you have to really, like Lindy said, it actually says in here that this is for discussion purposes only. I also just wanted to address the public process issue just a little bit. You know, we had a kickoff meeting for this in June of 2014, and subsequently another public meeting in February 2015. We've had other meetings. I know the invitations went out to that, and I know it went to neighbors in your area because I met people from Grove, I met people from Park, I met people from Steeplechase who came to these public meetings. No, I understand. But no, actually, at the February, we had a draft of this that they went through and was available on all the tables. We didn't just get invented. I mean, really, the concept chapter is the only really new chapter in here. And I'm not, you know, I know that people are busy and they miss things, but we literally have been having multiple public meetings for this over a year and a half. It didn't just happen.
It's on the agenda, too.
To respond to that, it's one thing to have a public meeting and have everybody throw out all these ideas, and not all of those ideas made it in here. Some that did, maybe the people don't want them in there. And so I think that now when we have a final document or something that we're being asked to approve or recommend, then you might want to have it out there a little bit longer or have a meeting on it aside from this one. And I do have a problem with that process. After today, should we approve it as is, it goes to, then what we're doing is recommending to the City Council that they approve it as is. Then it goes to the EDA. That's tomorrow night.
That's tomorrow night, yeah.
So what if they do something to it? Then our recommendation, what happens with our recommendation? Do they come back to us? I mean, I want, if I'm going to recommend something to the City Council, I want a final document.
Yeah.
I don't want something might change, or that, you know, it's not going to happen for 10 years, or there's going to, I want a final document.
Well,
I
I
can't
thought it was-
recommend something that isn't final.
I thought the EDA meeting was more informational for them to see what the final draft looks like, because they've already recommended during the period where boards and commission recommended, or did they skip it at that point? Because I thought they'd already looked at it.
They have.
So this is, I thought this was really just informational for them, but maybe I'm
Well,
wrong.
it's on their agenda to approve or to recommend.
What is your understanding? I won't hold you to this because this is a moderately technical question. What is your understanding with regard to these small area plans and the comp plan?
So these plans are not officially part of the comp plan. That they are designed to be a guide, so where the comprehensive plan identifies planning opportunity areas and specifies general principles, these small area plans are sort of a look at concepts or developments that might realize some of those ideas that are in the comp plan. So a lot of the ideas that are in the small area plans are in there to sort of spur thinking and throw out options, but they're not definite. Like has been said tonight, the city doesn't own most of this land, and the city certainly doesn't have the money to develop most of this land. That's just not something that cities do. So these small area plans are really about ideas and thoughts for the future. And so they're not officially part of the comp plan, but they are sort of guides for what might be possible.
So would you say that they inform the comp plan, or you would say they're just completely different than the comp plan?
I think they can be used to sort of inform the comp plan, where the comp plan spells out sort of specific goals, and some of those things are sort of listed in the motion. You know, the comp plan calls out planning opportunity areas, and it says within the planning opportunity area, these 6 things should be sort of focused on, whether it's pedestrian access or ground floor retail use or sort of neighborhood serving uses. Those sorts of things, right? That's a great list of ideas, but I think as these plans show, they can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so these plans are really about trying to further refine what do those things mean and what could they possibly look like for the city.
So what is the benefit of having one of these plans if it doesn't really mean anything?
So the benefit of this plan, right, is that it's an opportunity for the city and the staff, boards and commissions, community, to look at what's going on in this area before a development proposal comes in. So the idea of, you know, we've looked at sort of downtown, I think, is one of they're all interesting areas, but downtown sort of had that potential for sort of that walkable core, and maybe looking at, you know, the downtown area and saying, you know, this alley could be sort of a fun place if instead of just being sort of this weird area where water drains and cars park, if this were a place where people could come hang out. You know, when that rooftop deck was installed in the Dogwood Tavern, people were flocking there like I couldn't believe that people were so hungry for the potential to eat outside in this city that even though that area sort of overlooks an alley and a parking lot, people love it. So the idea of that plan was sort of how do we get more of that in there? So what is it that people are looking for? It's also an opportunity to look at, you know, the city has longer term problems like fiscal health and sustainability, and that's going to have to be solved either through drastically reducing spending, which I don't think people want to do, or it's going to have to come through additional development in the commercial areas. That there's going to have to be a way to preserve the residential character that makes Falls Church such a special place, while also allowing for increased activity in these commercial cores that bring a higher fiscal return than other areas in the city do. And so that's what the small area plan is about, is sort of looking at what is that blend of development and neighborhood preservation that sort of promote fiscal sustainability while also providing more of those things that people say they want. They say they want to go to places like the Mosaic District. Not that big, but they want the sort of options of that. And they want to be able to go to a restaurant or see live music, or they want to have an arts and culture district. So the small area plans are about sort of how do we get there given what the city looks like today.
Go ahead. Not right this minute.
Russ.
I don't have so many questions more than just general comments. I mean, we've looked at 4 of these. This is the 4th one we've looked at, these planning opportunity areas. And my understanding all along has really been that they are conceptual, that it gives us a chance as a city to dictate to developers, this is what we'd like to see there. They still need to come to us for special exceptions. And we sort of indicate that if a proposal were to come to us that met this kind of advisory document, that we would be much more amenable to that proposal. And it gives us a chance to sort of say, these are the opinions of the city prior to them being sort of thrust upon them, having them thrust upon us by the developers. So I really like, as we've done this in the past, is where we indicate these are places for potential redevelopment, where we've sort of looked at them, highlighted them, and said, if you are a developer, these are areas that are either old or we think could be possibly better utilized. I'm much more concerned, and I don't remember doing this in the other planning areas, where we are so specific about the heights, where we are dictating, and especially where we're dictating 7 and 8 stories. If a developer sees a a plot that they think is worth consolidating and worth putting that building on, certainly more than willing to welcome that proposal. But for us to be that kind of specific, where we're doing 2 floors at a time, that's really concerning. And I know we had come at the last meeting, last time we saw this, and said, let's be more specific, let's not be so general. But I feel like we've crossed into a line where this is too specific, especially on heights where they require special exceptions. You know, it can be sort of just maybe 2 colors. This could be a higher density area, and this is a lower density, or not area, but usage. This is the first time I've seen specific stories, and it feels too specific and especially controversial, seeing as anytime we get a property that has a special exception request, that brings a lot of public comment. So I think we crossed the line on that part of it. But as a concept, I like the concept chapter. I think, you know, as an executive summary, it sort of puts it easy, more accessible to the average, the average citizen who doesn't have the time to flip through all these pages. It reflects a lot of what we've talked about over the last year and a half. And I think this area has a lot of areas that are underutilized. This plan is a long time in coming. Some of them are going to be controversial, as we say. This is going to be a high-density spot, but there are a lot of spaces along one of our main commercial corridors that need updating, that are not commensurate with what I think Falls Church could be. And this plan sort of gives that guidance. It highlights in blue. It says, come here, make these changes. We see it too. It's not something that should just be left alone. As far as the streetscape goes, I think we need to be very careful. I've certainly been involved with that over the years, but I think it needs to be reviewed at this point. We tried an experiment in front of the Hilton Garden Inn. Perhaps that worked, perhaps it didn't, but there are elements that need to be reviewed. My view personally is that I like consistency over a hodgepodge, but there are various elements that need to be looked at. LED lighting, I think, is one of them, and so I think that it's good that it's in this document, so that we can force the issue, so that we can officially review it. We've been asking to do that for quite a while. My comment on the restroom and the train station, that actually, we've seen that for, I'm going to just say, like 2 years. It's been thrown in front of us. Never have we even had a single meeting on it. It's just sort of been put in front of it. And I really feel like it was put out there as a nice concept. The W&D Trail is sort of barren in Falls Church as it relates to facilities, but I think it really came before at least the major thrust of the Mason Road development. And so certainly hearing the public comments and seeing the design, it sounds like it's an idea that is not going to go forward, and probably rightly so. As a high user of the W&D Trail, I do feel like there's missing facilities there, whether it's a bathroom or a place to pump up your tires or to get a drink of water. There's one water fountain by West End Park. But as a concept, I liked it 2 years ago. I'm not sure it's the right location anymore, especially as we're talking about a development that is going to completely change the face of that intersection and that area of town. Basically, those are my comments. I want to say. Otherwise, great work. I mean, visually, there's a few pictures I might change, but I think it really encapsulates what we had talked about over the last year and a half. So, thank you.
Do I get a second chance? Thank you. Sure. Thank you, Rob.
Everybody
Anyway.
gets a second chance.
But I found it very interesting, and a lot of the for instance, about the Rite Aid parking lot and the need for, changing that area and the use of that land, and the situation with the trucks, on going forth to Fairfax County, asking them, could trucks please go down Route 50, where they're not allowed, the heavy-duty trucks, and keep that off of 7. I thought some of the issues that were brought up in here are put into words. Some of the things we've talked about for years of some of the necessary items and for parking agreements and so much, just it had a lot of side issues in it, which I found, quite interesting. And so I like the concept part of it. The only thing is maybe we don't need those height limit pages. But, that, or just change them, to some other designation.
I think our main issue was the area like near where Spring and stuff where the small houses are, is we definitely wanted them designated as places where it would have to be low density.
Right, because they're
If it
so
was
shallow.
developed. But,
Well,
I maybe just taking out the dark blue for sure. Not encouraging that type of height. Would
So
be
what
good.
happens if we defer this?
So if you defer the action,
plenty of time.
I think, let's see, what are the real implications on the schedule? If the Planning Commission wants to meet again in August, there are no problems at all. If the planning, I mean,
We got
another
nothing, Paul.
option- What's that?
We got nothing.
So another option is to look at.
We're here for you.
Well, that's fantastic news. Thank you, Chair.
It's news to us too, Rob.
I mean, another option to look at, we could go back and examine sort of what happens in the September schedule. I think the advantage of sort of taking an action now is that there may be minor tweaks that happen to the plan, whether it goes to the EDA or maybe a couple more boards and commissions come in with sort of updated comments or something like that. The advantage of the Planning Commission taking action tonight is that it puts a stake in the ground and it really forces the conversation to move in the direction. And that's, I think, some of the things that are included in the motion are sort of the key items in this plan. And so if that's what the Planning Commission feels strongly in, the Planning Commission can put those items in the motion and make those sort of a hallmark of its action. And that sort of ensures that those are going to stay in the plan as minor changes are made.
Comment on that. Just as the concept section was new to us, it's going to be new to the EDA tomorrow night. And I think that is something to be really, conscious of and perhaps deferring.
Yeah, I would like to see this deferred and come back to us with some of the changes that we've suggested. Because I wasn't against your the concept plan. It's just that came up first.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I kind of jumped on that, and I'm sorry. But I do think that going back through all of the different pages that have those heights on it, they all need to be changed because it seems to be a consensus that we would like to see something a little bit vaguer. And the streetscape and the LED lighting are things that, while they may be mentioned in there, it would be good to say that this is something that we're going to revisit, as the same thing with the train station.
Yeah.
The train station itself needs a separate hearing, I think.
No, definitely.
There's some pictures in there that could be cleaned up. I think that maybe they've been copied so many times that they're not clear. But one of them that I would really like to see change is the picture of the Hilton garage as an example of a parking garage. Please don't put that out there as a good example.
I think the back of the,
Well, here's what let's do.
better.
Well, okay, so I actually have one sort of technical question, and that is, I heard the comment, and I still was confused when I read through this this weekend about what we're doing with transitional zones, and I may have missed it, and it may be in here, but I still don't really understand what we're trying to do there. So, tell me.
Okay, so the transition zoning, I think what you're referring to is the map on page 5-8. The title of the map is Potential Zoning Changes.
Yes.
And what it identifies is along that southern border of the planning opportunity area, there are a lot of parcels that are today zoned R1A, which is the sort of low-density residential district.
Right.
But when the comp plan was drafted, these planning opportunity area borders were drawn very sort of meticulously around certain parcels to either include them or not include them. And so my understanding then is that the of the comp plan is that the planning commission, or I'm sorry, the comprehensive plan really wanted to, sorry, I forgot the word. The comprehensive plan really wanted to include these particular parcels in the planning opportunity area. And so I think what this plan is then trying to say is if the comp plan wanted these things in the planning opportunity area, it must mean that it meant for these parcels to do something. And I think what it's doing is that on the north side of the planning opportunity area, you've got Park Avenue. And Park Avenue can serve as a place where two different uses can sort of meet. That you can have single family on one side and maybe townhouse or townhouse office or something like that on the other side, and those two things can kind of talk to each other. On the south side of the planning opportunity area, you don't have a street. You've just got parcels that knock into one another. And so the idea is, what kind of tool does the city have in its bag that can help make that transition? It's transition zoning. So that T-zone can allow for residential uses. It can also allow for some sort of commercial and office uses, but it has the setback provisions in there and the buffer provisions that ensure that that works for both neighbors. And so I think that's why the T-zones are there.
Okay.
And those little funky places along that side.
I didn't understand that when I read it. So I understand what you just said.
So you need some of that.
Is that in there?
I
mean, it's, I actually did very well in school. I never asked questions like that. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, I didn't really follow that when I read it.
Yeah, we can clarify sort of the methodology of why that's done.
Fine. Okay.
Mr. Meeks.
I think when we talked about that earlier, we talked about it being, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
We talked about it being changed to business. So I was surprised to see it go to transition. I'm happy with it as transition because I think that was better. But we were talking about it originally to have it go to a lower business classification.
And I think that was me. I was pushing for that because I don't think that transitional makes a lot of sense because it leaves it open to all kinds of things and we don't make clear our possibilities. So across from the library, we left that lot transitional, and I think we all regret that.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And we wish that we had made that lot low-density business because then we had no control of the future of it.
Yeah.
And so that probably was me, but I'm fine with it staying transitional. I just think transitional is us deciding to let whoever, a developer could come in and do something totally different than what we would like to see there.
But it's R1A now.
Right.
Is the issue. Okay.
Right.
Okay,
But
I
that
didn't
was-
understand that.
Yeah, but my whole thing was when you turn it to transitional, then it's just open to anything.
Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to advise for those who took their time to come to tonight's meeting that we have two different processes for notifying when development is coming through, these small area plans that we've been doing piece by piece, we provide notice to everyone within a certain radius from that site or the boundaries of that small area plan, and we invite you to a community kickoff meeting. And then we go to work as staff for about 6 months, and then we invite you back to a second community meeting saying, this is what we heard, did we get it right? That's a very different process from, for example, the Mason Road proposal that's now in your neighborhood. That has a different notification process, which we notified you when we were having public hearings on that particular application. But for the adoption or a planning commission recommendation for adoption of a small area plan, we don't advertise that. We don't do, everything in the adjacent area. Anyone who's not already signed up on the city website, it's easy to sign up to get the planning commission agenda.
Agendas, yeah.
And that might be something that could help you track the things that are of interest to you. So I apologize if there was the expectation that you would get a notice for tonight's meeting to adopt the comprehensive plan. We just have not done that in the past.
Area plan, yeah. I've got 2 other corrections I want to make.
You got a second chance, not a, all right, go ahead.
I've got 3s.
All right.
Anyway, because I was saying, oh, should I? But on 7-11, you've got a skate park, and it's a skate feature, and we've really got to stick to that terminology. And then the other thing is the open space and the spectrum development. It did say it's got some activity, but that's our example of a festival street.
Space, yep.
And that's not mentioned there, but that's our one and only example in the city of a festival street.
Here's what we're going to do.
That's it.
Go ahead.
I did want to ask a question, sort of put it out for the planning commission to get a little feedback, because on the one hand, I think there's a desire to specify sort of what's going to happen in terms of building heights, but there's not a desire to say, we really want 8 stories here.
Yeah.
And so on the flip side, there is a desire to say, whoa, in these areas we don't want more than, say, 3 or 4 stories. So there's a great deal of comfort that comes from specifying a height maximum, especially when you're bordering sort of residential or other sort of low scale or low height development. What's a better way maybe to capture the idea that higher development would be welcome here? On the one hand, I'm worried that a classification of 5 to 8 might be misconstrued as 8 everywhere. But on the flip side, if you say 5 to 6, does that mean you're not allowing 7 or 8, even though that might be allowed by the special exception? Are you? It's a difficult sort of.
Well, I can answer that question very specifically. We have an actual zoning code. B1 has a building height. B3 has a building height. So I don't know where this got introduced in the system, but like if we could purge it, it'd just make everything better. So we actually have codes that specify what the height should be. So are there times that we would give someone a special exception? If they built a particularly beautiful building of steel and brick, would we give them higher? If they built it in a certain place and there were certain reasons for it to be higher, yes, we would grant a special exception. I think my challenge is that I don't know that I'm sort of agnostic on height, but we actually have codes that that have sort of done this already. So my challenge was, as Russ said, like we've crossed this line of more detail than I think we really need to do relative to the existing zoning and the existing thing on the ground.
It's 5-story and 55 feet. We've got that.
Well, I guess the question is, this came up because we were most concerned about those shallow lots. And Russ suggested that we do something where we just mark where we want to make sure that it's like lower density. I mean, 'cause the whole concept was that we want to push the fact that it's lower density near residential and higher on Broad. I don't know if that works still. I mean, the other side is we just take out the height things
I do want to sort of interject and say that low height and low density are not the same thing. For a long time, Georgetown and Old Town Alexandria were substantially more dense than Tyson's Corner. Tyson's Corner is littered with tall buildings, but it's almost entirely surrounded by surface parking. So it is an extremely low density environment, but also extremely high. There's a way to get high density with lower heights, and that can serve a lot of purposes.
Well, I think here the issue really is height. That's what we hear from the citizens.
I think we have a zoning code. I think we've specified heights. I think we've talked a lot about heights in the zoning code and sort of along the way. And I think we would be amenable to special exceptions. It's a special exception. And, you know, where it goes and what gets consolidated, that's why I was going with the downtown plan, which I think does talk to, hey, if you could consolidate this, and this is consolidatable, this is a place where you could put density because of the way traffic flows. But I think I couldn't have said, I can't say it any better than the way Russ said it.
We can do something with that.
Yeah, because you've identified all the parcels that have potential for development.
Mm-hmm.
And we know what zone they're in, what they're zoned, and let's just proceed from there. You don't have to say anything aside from potential development area, or these two parcels could be consolidated, or
we're going to make a motion to defer this. We're going to make a motion to defer this to a date in the future, or should we be more specific?
I think it depends on how much time they need to go over this document again.
My suggestion would be that we defer it until September, because then we'll have done our walk that got canceled with the city council.
Yeah. Your scheduled meeting dates in September are the 8th, which is a Tuesday following Labor Day, or Monday the 21st.
My preference is for earlier. I think that's plenty of time for staff to respond to sort of the stuff that's come up tonight.
But we've got
The
that
question is
walk-around.
the walk.
We've got that walk around in September.
Yes,
September
I could
8th.
do the walk first.
Yeah, September 8th, too
Yeah,
early to get
right.
the walk in.
The 8th. We'll do it the 8th, and if there's a problem, we'll reschedule it. You make a motion?
Good decision.
Where is the description? I'd make a motion that we defer the West Broad Street small area plan to September 8th, 2015.
I'll second it.
Motion moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye, unless I need to do a roll call. I don't think I do. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 The ayes have it. Deferred till September 8th. Outstanding.
Good job, Rob.
Okay, next item, new business. No new business. Item 7, other business, none. Item 8, approval of minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the minutes as presented.
I'll second it.
Motion moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Minutes are approved. Planning Commission reports.
I've got something. Sorry, I'll make it quick. You got me scared, Rob. Anyway, I went to the Chamber of Commerce presentation on the transportation plan for Route 7 coming from the Virginia Department of Transportation. And they're still talking, you know, streetcar and stuff like that. I just get
Nervous.
and assigned and designated bus lanes. I am just concerned about still talking about the streetcars. All through this, we're talking about undergrounding utilities. That's one of our main goals in our world, is to get all those darn lines down. And, you know, that would mean putting darn lines back up again. And I just don't see the sense in that. So I hope that we are kept abreast of the situation. It was a pretty skim over presentation, but it just really bothered me that, you know, I cannot see designated lanes on Broad Street. I don't, you know, for buses.
You
I
mean
don't-
like HOV?
That would be, yeah, a designated lane for bus. And, you know, this, they're talking about us, and again, not knowing what us is. And that really annoys me.
You know, I went to a similar presentation in Tyson's Corner, and I will tell you what made me so frustrated is that everyone talks about alternative transportation, and that whole plan is about buses and streetcars. There's no bike lanes. There is no plan for an alternative transportation that is not
Nope. Not streetcars
mass
or
transit or
buses.
one sort of another. So it was very frustrating. Yes.
If I could just sort of say a few things about that. One, that plan, it's the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, which is running the show. It's not a VDOT show in this case.
Right.
And the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission was actually asked by the participating localities, City of Falls Church, Fairfax County, City of Alexandria, Arlington County, to run the show because NBTC has a sort of experience with being a convener amongst localities in the area. So that's one thing, is that it's very locally controlled. The second thing, the reason the only modes that are being looked at are transit is because the full name of the study is a transit alternatives analysis. And this was started years ago, actually at the request of the City of Falls Church, to look at ways to bring a higher capacity transit option to the city. That years ago, the city did not participate in sort of installation of a metro station within the City of Falls Church. Instead, the two stations are both outside the boundaries. And so now the city has, in a sense, been sort of, it's been sort of not connected to the transit system as strongly as it could have been. And so is there a way to do something about that? And that's why this is being explored. Light rail lines are popular throughout the U.S. It's an option that's out there. One of the things that we've been pushing on the staff side is to keep investigating and researching options for running the wires underground. There are ways to do it. It's more expensive. We could look at what the possibility of that is. The second thing, in terms of a bus-only lane, there are various communities throughout the U.S. and even here locally where they use a lane differently depending on the time of day. And during sort of crunch travel times is when you need to get as much as you can out of your transportation infrastructure. And I know even in, this is an example where I happen to see it and I remember it, even in downtown Cleveland, they actually convert their outside travel lane to a bus and sort of turn only lane during rush hour. It's not because fewer cars want to travel at that time, but it's because the city can move more people by reserving that space for buses and turns. And so is something like that appropriate in the city? That the study is looking at Route 7 all the way from Tyson's Corner to Alexandria, and so the configuration of Route 7 changes dramatically. So there are some places where it may not be that big a deal to get a dedicated lane. There are some places like the City of Falls Church where it could be a very big deal. And so what they're trying to do is throw out all of these ideas and options that they've seen, and how is that going to work? What's going to be the impact on the traveling public? Is this something that should be done today, or maybe it should be something that should be sort of looked at again 10, 15, 20 years in the future? These are things that can be rolled out over time.
I knew you'd know all those answers.
That will be your planning director's report. So outstanding. Thank you for keeping us on time.
I have one question.
Okay.
Sorry. I'm sure some of you are aware that the reserve at Tenor Hill is being renamed the Lincoln.
Yes.
Kind of at Tenor Hill now, but lesser at Tenor Hill. And so that means that they've opened up the voluntary concessions, because that's the naming was part of that. So are we, the Planning Commission, going to see any adjustments that are made to that voluntary concessions? Because typically if that's opened up, the Planning Commission needs to see it before it's finalized.
Could I say little I know about it? It's been really, really back and forth, and it's been very conflict oriented. I think that Cindy Messer has helped resolve the situation.
Well, I understand that, but
Demi, no?
But typically we should see whatever the changes are.
I agree.
That's all I'm saying, is
Yeah,
I want
okay.
us to see it.
Yeah.
And,
Part of the process.
Right, the part of the process is
Right,
that if they
okay.
open it up, the Planning Commission should see it. and be able to comment upon it before it's finalized.
It's been so.
No, I understand that part. Thank you.
Okay, so Planning Commission reports. Ms. Rogers and I were lucky enough to attend the very undemocratic EDC meeting with the very excellent development at the corner of Broad and Washington. It's very exciting.
Do we know when
No.
Mason Rose coming in again?
It's under consideration.
Do we know when Mason Rose coming in?
It's in.
Yeah, but in.
In, but
The materials have been submitted to staff, and staff is looking at what it'll take to put together another schedule for review of the application.
Okay.
Okay, Planning Director's report we did. Motion to adjourn.
I move.
Second.
Moved and seconded, we are adjourned.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Rob.
You can go there and see what happens when you don't have bullnose, because the sidewalk was salted, all of the plantings have died. Yes, and the mulching washed away. So we have photographs of what happened, and then they went back and they've put mulch in now. None of the plantings have been replaced. And this is a case where the building owner is taking care of the streetscape, which is another issue to talk about as well. So that's...
Okay, so maybe you have an example. Okay.
So there, now the bullnose itself may not be the only answer, but it's one answer. There's other ways to do it. Other ways are to use the steel fencing that has about an 8 or 10 inch protectorate on it. And we've got pictures of that around the country. That works well. It keeps the mulching in the bed, and it keeps the salt out of the bed to some degree. But there's, when we looked at it, the Village Society said we had no problem with Pearson's initially streetscape. The more we looked at it, we do. We've got problems with it, and we need to find another solution.
Okay, we'll come back to it. Okay, can we, so the W node, which can you do quickest?
Paper streets.
Good. Do you have slides?
I have a
Handout?
demonstration too.
Ah,
I'm so glad
great.
we're getting to this. We've been asking for this forever.
Let's see what I got.
So we have slides.
I'm gonna look into what I got. So what I've got is just an electronic copy here of the materials that were handed out.
Oh, good.
So the also handed out at the dais tonight were 2 letters submitted by the Village Preservation and Improvement Society. They came in over the weekend. They'd come in before, but they came in fresh over the weekend, and I distributed those. Ms. G distributed those at the dais. As has been mentioned, this is sort of something that's been on sort of and off for discussion several times. And so this is really seen as both a response to something that the Planning Commission has been looking for and has been a point of discussion within the community. It's also a follow-up action to the Parks for People plan, which was the sort of Parks and Recreation and Open Space chapter of the city's comprehensive plan. The idea was there are a lot of paper streets, and this plan defines what a paper street is. For those not sort of up on their urban planning terminology, it's an area within the city that was previously designated for development as a street, but it was never developed as a street. So it's a street on paper only, paper street. And so the question is sort of what does the city want to do with these things? And so the thought that's laid out in this report that was attached, if you jump to page 5, the idea is to look at the various paper streets that are available within the city and then think about sort of what might be potential uses. And so this document would be a report, and it would be informative, but it would not be a plan. It's not a series of action items. There's no budget item to go through and develop these things. But it does help to specify, and there would be updates to the future land use map that this report would be in support of, which are on page 6. And it's going through and identifying all the paper streets within the city as future parks and open space. And then, so where 6 is the sort of formal changes that would happen to the proposed future land use map. 5 are sort of the potential uses for those areas. Some of them are being used or could be used as a pedestrian and bicycle connector. Some of them could be used simply as a natural or an open space. And then there are a couple, for example, 107. Right now it's colored in brown because it's being used as a parking lot for the park, but I think on a second draft of this, well, it's version 2, so on a third draft of this, we would change that to be green and say, look, we intend this to be used for park purposes. Whatever that means for the park, let's let them decide. And so the idea is that there would be sort of a formal change to the future land use map. There's sort of a report that talks about, so what could you use these things for? And there are lots of things they could be used for. Page 1 talks about sort of pedestrian and bicycle access, natural area and mini parks, and then sort of access to lots that may be needed. So what staff is looking for tonight, this is a work session item only, staff's looking for feedback from the Planning Commission on the idea of turning these things green on the future land use map, and then looking for sort of feedback or questions or concerns or questions the Planning Commission has answers. Questions they want answered, and then also just taking a look at sort of the timing and whether that's sort of the right pace for dealing with this item. This has been on sort of the discussion table for a long time, and so is this something we can move relatively quickly on?
One question I have are, I'm only aware of certain ones.
Mm-hmm.
I know they're all over the city. Are there any that would be affected by things people are doing to them, or
encroachments.
Encroachments, but say if you were using it as a driveway to garage, do we have to notify all those people?
This is, so I was
specifically thinking of the one off Cherry Street.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So, so I would have to follow up on the specifics of that case, but there's a difference between updating the comp plan and updating the zoning ordinance. And so by updating the future land use map, we're not changing the zoning ordinance. So it doesn't require sort of the notifications for a zoning change. And so I'd have to look into sort of what are the notification requirements for a future land use map change, but I imagine they're different.
Well,
I thought we were asking for a zoning change.
yeah, you've sort of that. Why aren't we just changing the zoning?
So well, that's now there's a question there about sort of how would you want to change the zoning ordinance. That today, all these sort of zoning interpretations and staff decisions that have been made are treating the paper streets as if they are zoned R1A. And so currently that is the zone for parks in the city.
Well,
That's so silly.
no, but so that was the whole way. A lot of, I don't know how many years ago, this came up originally, that these should not be R1A. These should be
That's
zoned
right.
as parks or whatever that designation
In the open
was.
space plan.
They should be considered as open space. And conceptually, that's parks. And the reason I hedge a little is that there may be some, I can't think of as an example, that it wouldn't necessarily be a park. It may be, so Cedar Street was one.
Cedars.
We may not
Cedars
make it
got
a
a lot of
park. It may be
encroachments.
something not R1A, but not, do you know what I mean?
Well, I know yeah, I'm getting the sense that there's a desire for to designate a difference between parks and not parks in the zoning ordinance. But I guess the question that I have for the Planning Commission members then is sort of, what do you think the park zone would do that the R1A doesn't?
I think that's a
good question.
Well, no, it's so okay. Generally, I mean this. Okay, see this. We're back to your thing here on this. Okay, generally speaking, the idea was that you could take the paper streets and that this would be a foundation, if you will, that you would build connectability. So using Cedar as an example, you've got this thing running. The Cavalier, there was a beautiful plan before the whole PED plan sort of derailed it, to take this paper street out of Cavalier Trail and connect it up through Howard Herman, because there were enough paper streets, and you could take the open space fund, and with the acquisition of a fairly nominal amount of backyard, and really it would be just getting easements, you could build another trail up through this. What that trail would be zoned, I'm not sure, but it wouldn't be R1A, to distinguish it as part of the open space and as part of another linear park. So the original concept was that these would be essentially linear parks where that made sense. Now, we ran into this issue, so I believe it's Chestnut Street off of Grove, dead ends, and there's enough to make a pocket park. The issue became, do you make that a park? Because if you do, it's too small, really, except for
a picnic table.
Yeah, I mean, it's not big enough to be a park. So what is it? You know, it's confusing.
And who's going to take care of it?
And who's then going to take care of it? That's where we sort of ran aground on this plan. So in other words, you're causing sort of a maintenance headache for something that's not big enough to really do anything effective with. But
but I think that there's another category we can think of, because to me, a lot of these are naturally trails and bike trails. That's what we're using them as now in a lot of cases.
Well, but let me finish the idea though. The theory of that would be that you've distinguished between parks and maybe just excess real estate. You know, that is R1A and could be sold to the guy who owns the adjacent property. But you've done it. You've not necessarily done it. You haven't necessarily literally sold it, but you've just sort of distinguished where you're trying to go with the park planning. That was the reason for the zoning.
Right. Well, I would just say that I think that Vipus has made a really good point. I think Mr. Thurston today went over it again. Even the ones that aren't really usable, we shouldn't be thinking of making them. No. So I
misspoke. I'm not talking about selling them. What I'm talking about
we definitely don't want to
is
do that
you're zoning them with this intention of sort of longer term park planning.
City use.
Yeah.
Right. So you make Cedar into clearly what is a linear park with the intention of connecting it to something else. So it is more than just what it is now.
Yeah, but what I was going to say too is on those things like the pocket parks or the things that they're marked in here as natural areas, we can make them not needing a lot of maintenance. We can make them so that they only need maintenance every few years by just put them on a list of things for Boy Scout projects, as we always need them, and just say we'll put natural shrubs that feed birds or something, or butterfly, things that can grow and just need to be trimmed every few years. They don't have to be grassy areas. They can be native planting areas, like rain gardens. They can be rain gardens, and that keeps them natural and keeps them there.
That isn't a major project though, because I've watched 2 rain gardens go in near my house, and those are major projects.
Oh, well, the Boy Scouts have done several of them, and they're not as major.
I mean, these are the city.
Well, do I understand what you're saying? But I'm just saying, like, the end of Chestnut, that is an area with known flooding issues. So you could just take that, and instead of making it a grassy area that has to be cut or something, you make it into a rain garden or you know, some type of planting that would help absorb the water problem in that area that only needs to be trimmed every year or so. You know, there's non-maintenance ways of keeping them green. That's what I'm saying.
I get what you're saying, but so that gets into this whole issue of park planning. So you're spending money for something that is maybe not a higher priority relative to the ability to turn some of these into bigger, more complicated linear trails. If you could connect Cavalier Trail up, you know, to the WNOD, which again I think is kind of doable, but you got to start taking some of these paper streets, and then you have additional land acquisition as part of this. That's how it's supposed to have worked in 2005.
I just think with the natural areas,
That's true.
we don't spend our time and stuff on them. But seriously, like VPIS, we've been talking about having a short list of things that Eagle Projects could do. And these are the kind of things we want to put on there, where we don't need a lot of staff expertise. We just need someone to go in and redo them and plant them.
But
And
do you,
that we're
okay,
not
so
spending
let's
time
just
on
take
it.
Chestnut Street as an example. Are you officially intending to make it a park, or are we just hanging on to it, and maybe it's okay if it's R1A? That's the question.
Well, my answer is that we're officially hanging on to it as open green space that can absorb water.
Okay, so I
does it
got
need?
that, and I'm not trying to sell it, and so that's not the question. The
I
question
know.
is, are you rezoning it with the intention of planning it as a park?
We don't have a park zoning, correct?
Oh, we don't.
No,
So-
that's
No, and
one of
that's
the
the
concerns
point.
I wanted
That's
to
where we're
raise.
trying to go.
So I guess the thing.
Okay, you're not answering the question.
No.
You're
to me-
digressing.
to me, this is a two-part answer. First, we fix the land use in the comp plan so it's set, and then two, we have a discussion of do we need a park zoning, and then if we do, that's a longer process. But I think first off, we need to fix the land use on the comp plan maps.
And
Yeah.
the park, and
Okay, so no, you gotta be you're digressed
Well, I
off
don't-
the question. No, because
I don't want to go digressing
because
and
the
not do the
reason
land
that
use
it's
change.
important is you're not selling it, but there's a big difference between it's planned as a park and it's maintained, even if you're just building a rain garden, even if you're just putting it, my goodness, look at the planning that went into Howard E. Herman Stream Valley Park. That started.
R1A.
Well, but it's supposed to be
Actually, it's
park.
R1B, isn't it?
But in other words, the plans, even if it's 10,000 square feet, get a little bit more complicated if you're planning it as a park.
Right.
Right? So the idea was we would zone those areas that are clearly parks, right?
I'm sorry, my memory doesn't go back as far as 2005.
But that's okay. The theory was you would zone those things that are clearly parks, and then those paper streets and other areas, and this ties into open space. It dovetails into future park planning, right? So again, Cavalier Trail Park to the WNOD. I can't remember, so don't quote me on this exactly, but it literally is like 800 square feet worth of land acquisition or easement
Easements,
acquisition
yeah.
to
Easements,
complete
yeah.
the trail up, right? So, pretty easy, but you got to actually plan it, and when you get that land, it is then zoned as park, and it's a linear park from Cavalier Trail up. That's the idea. So then you have surplus land like Chestnut Street. Are you planning that as a park? That was the reason why we wanted to do this connected in to the zoning.
So there's a difference between the future land use map and the zoning map. That the future land use map says, what do we want this land to be in the future? And if you look at what's up on
Yeah,
the
but we
screen-
wanted this to have teeth in the force of law. We wanted this
Right.
to reach into, we wanted this to have, I mean, the whole idea of the open space thing was not a future land use plan that a future council or a future planning commissioner or some staff guy could come in and sort of say, hey, why don't we do this? It was to make the force of law as it related to park and open space.
it really was.
We're beyond this. No offense to you.
Well, I mean, in some sense, right, and I'm going to push back a little bit, and the discussion may have moved beyond that, but the policy actions didn't keep pace. So the question is,
Well,
do
we
you-
did nothing. So
Right.
in that sense, our pace was consistent. So you could say that we maintained our splits all the way through the race.
Gotcha. We were consistent.
And so that's, I guess, my concern, and that's why sort of this is the draft schedule for just updating the future land use map. Is this updating the future land use map better than leaving the situation as it is?
It probably is. My feeling is it probably is, but my concern is that if we do that, then that's all that we'll ever get done.
Can we update the schedule that shows us fix?
If we're still going to be having a discussion, we need to use the microphone.
Ruth.
My microphone was on, I was just too far away.
Okay.
Oh, no, it wasn't. I'm sorry.
Well, can we update it then to say that first we're going to fix the land use, future land use, because we're going to have to do that regardless if we do the zoning, and then second we work on adding a new zoning. Just we're going to have to add a new zoning, and that's going to take a little time to do. So maybe we could have the schedule show first step, the steps to do it, second step, do the zoning, and I mean I will just say this that not having a specific park zoning has not hurt Cherry Hill and all the other places that we consider to be parks, but I think we do need to force a law in most of these examples because we have a history of people taking advantage of the property.
Yes.
And so we do need that force of law ultimately.
We really need that.
We have people who live close to West End, and this all started because West End, everyone thought it was a park, and then all of a sudden there's going to be this building in it. So this has a history. There was a plan, and like we were on sort of a course to do this, and we did lose kind of a certain amount of momentum, and unfortunately the Open Space Committee has sort of lost some momentum on this. But I think we can get it back, and I think we have to go back to an actual change in the code.
I agree with you.
I think our first step is to go over by one property and have a party on the nice new landscape they did on the public land for us.
I run down Cedar Street about once every 2 months, and that
bike.
guy and I have gotten into it a little bit.
About the
It's more fun if you
Yeah.
it's more fun when you ride your bike through it because then he really panics.
Yeah,
You're going to
he's-
run over something.
Well, I mean, it's not because we want to run or ride our bike through somebody's garden. No, I know. But what we need is
the garden
something
shouldn't be there.
that is, it's there so that we can refer to it. What is the advantage of having it stay zoned R1A?
So the advantage, certainly from sort of a procedural standpoint, you don't have to develop a new zoning district. That takes time because you got to consider what are the setback requirements, what are and are not allowable uses, because there are lots of things you might do in parks that you might sort of forget, and then you've got a problem. So there's just the hassle of standing up a new zoning district. The other thing that comes in, right, is that you'd probably want to avoid zoning anybody's land as park and open space unless you already own it. Otherwise, you've really put your foot in a hornet's nest to zone someone else's land and say you can never develop it.
What did we just do in this thing? Land use.
Right. Those are land use changes,
land use,
and it suggests zoning changes, but it never suggests removing someone's development rights entirely.
But don't we know? I mean, if these are paper streets, don't we know that they belong to the city?
Sure. And so we could update the zoning in the area that the city owns. But it only seems to be sort of a partial thing. If the zoning district is supposed to apply to all of your future parks, well, now it doesn't. So does the zoning district only apply to things that you intend to be parks if you already own them? And so in some ways, right, land use and zoning are supposed to be two different things. That sort of land use is what you want to have happen, and then zoning is what you're legally allowed to do. And so if the concern is the future land use map changes won't be enough to prevent the kinds of activity we want, that the Planning Commission wants to avoid happening on those areas, then maybe it's something like what Mr. Thurston said, that you look at sort of what's involved in administrative approvals, and can you allow maybe you restrict certain kinds of administrative approvals when it includes something that is planned as parks and open space.
I don't think it's possible for me to disagree with what you said anymore. Because I think the intent was to give this the force of law in perpetuity. And basically what I'm sort of hearing you saying is, well, I don't know that we want to make these parks for any longer. I don't think anyone's ever going to be able to develop in Cherry Hill. So why can't we have a zoning classification for Cherry Hill Park?
You know,
you can have one. The question is who's going to write it and when are they going to do it?
Well, but I don't know that writing it is that, how is writing it that complicated?
It's not hard to do. All these things are really easy. It's just a question of which one do you want to do first. Do you want to review the Mason Road proposal, or do you want to write a zoning district
Well,
for
but
parks?
I think if you retrospectively, if we'd have done a little work and had a pace that was albeit slow but consistent, I think by now, 2015, we'd have gotten this done, don't you?
Yeah, we did that study back in '05. But
Listen, I've been here a long time, and I've seen a lot of goofy things that we've done that we've put a lot of energy into. So I I would just say, I mean, there are some wacky studies that we have done. I mean, it's, less wacky now, but, in the past. So we spent a lot of energy on things that once we sort of...
I'm also worried about putting the goal too far forward of where we are today, right? We've seen plans fail
Well, you
in the
can
past.
change the land use map, but I think we would like to get to hit this at a much larger level. I also think, and this is where we could spend too long on this that we have this evening, but I also think had we had the benefit of some zoning as it relates to some of these issues with paper streets, we would have, for example, the house on Van Buren, thank you very much, where there was an encroachment and there was this question about the setbacks, we would have avoided that issue.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't think so. I don't think it would have.
Because the setbacks are consistent with R1A.
The only way that they would have been
but
safe is if we said that was a street and it was
Actually, if it had been parkland,
looked at as a park,
him.
he still would have been able to do the same thing.
But he may not have landscaped it.
Yeah,
Well,
this
he
is what he's done
did
now,
that
though.
as a favor to the community. And my understanding is that he did that as a lot of these
Well,
areas.
I'm going to go have a barbecue there then.
And that's fine. I think
favor.
that's one of the things we're looking at is how can you sign these things and say, this is public property. And maybe we should have a little sign that says this spot is adopted by so-and-so, but all are welcome to enjoy this space.
I think one of the things we asked about is we thought there should be fencing along there because it isn't clear that it's part of the park. And it is. But that's a whole nother issue. Let me just say it. Let's do the land use change first, then the zoning change. But let's do the land use change soon. Because that's not that difficult.
Yeah.
Let's do it very, very soon.
Yes.
And then we'll think of the zoning change as a longer term project, but we'd like to do it, in the next 6 months if possible. Because we've got to get it in there before the budget starts, because then the council spends 6 months on the budget and we can't get anything done.
But, the other thing is, I just don't see what zoning R1A has anything to do with it being a park. I've never understood it.
Well, it
It's
wasn't meant to
stupid
be
me.
a park.
Well, the
Lindy,
churches
it was never
are-
meant to be a park. They were meant to be streets, and the streets were going to
He
be
meant the
developed.
current parks.
Yeah, but
Oh,
the
you mean the
parks.
current parks? Okay.
Yeah, it's
All the
it
churches
has
are
no
the same
sensibility
thing.
to it at all.
Well, we have churches in the same circumstances. Churches are R1A or R1B, kind of where they are. And because there's no
Well,
zoning
that's fine.
specific
They might
to that
want to
either.
sell their land or something or other like that.
Well,
Yeah.
I would like to see more of a comprehensive, relative to parks and the people, more of a comprehensive approach to how the future park planning will be done. And, it's conceivable to me, we've used this as an example because it's the only example I can sort of think of off the top of my head. It's conceivable to me, Chestnut Street would make a great park. This would be good for park planning, and we ought to get it in next year's CIP. But I don't really know. I don't know that, right? If no one's taken the lead on figuring out what our park planning is, how are we going to get the park planning done? Which is where I was going with these zoning changes as it relates to the paper streets.
That was an easy one.
Okay, awesome. W&OD Park Master Plan. So I have a quick question, and maybe this will help us a little bit. It was confusing to me what abilities we have to... I understand what you wrote this time. How much authority, how much... Go ahead. Do your introduction.
You're talking about the relationship with the Friends of the WNOD and the
Well,
Northern Virginia Park Authority who owns this park.
Yeah, right.
But
A
what
whole
we
lot of
find is,
people.
I've worked with them before in Eagle Projects. They're very cooperative people. They want us to improve it because they don't really have the ability to do it themselves. So I think we do have some ability, but you're right. It's always going to be in
This is
synergy,
just-
working
yeah.
together.
I feel like we sort of knocked
could move
out
over the
a
other
lot
side.
with the better crossings. You know, the pedestrian crossing thing.
I was just saying that screen facing.
Oh, yeah. Right there, I can get this.
Yeah, I just want to, it just gives me a reference of what page we're on. It's just sort of awkward.
Have you been confused, Russ?
On the presentation,
You liked us here an hour ago.
I get what you're saying, Ralph. We don't own it. Everyone else that does it. But they're abusive. They like it when we do stuff.
Lindy?
So the question was sort of how much authority does the,
Here.
oh,
What am I getting?
Well, it's on here now.
This is the
It's fine.
is that enough?
Yeah, I just want to know what page we're on.
Sure. So, so you would ask sort of what authority does the city have? And I've been saying this to everyone as I've sort of gone through this planning effort, that this is sort of what governments do, is they plan stuff they don't own. That's how comprehensive planning and small area planning works. So it's a little bit different here because it's owned by another public entity, and that's a little bit more rare. But we told Arlington to build a second entrance into the East Falls Church Metro, and that's owned by WMATA and VDOT and Arlington, so we get into everybody's business. But you're right that we ultimately don't own the land. But just like Commissioner Teat said, Nova Parks, they've renamed themselves, has been very supportive of these kinds of planning efforts. And in fact, Nova Parks actually paid for the preliminary engineering of 2 of these sort of small plazas. One at the Walter Mess Plaza and the other one Veterans Common.
Right, right.
They paid for that out of their own money because they were interested in it. They thought it was a way to improve the trail. And they did that with the understanding that there'd be a sort of a partnership, that they would be heavily involved in the design, the city would be heavily involved in sort of finding grant funds to make this actually happen. But it's all being done with sort of the consent and the sort of overarching view of something that works both for Nova Parks and for the city. So there's a lot of potential here, and there's a lot of grant funding out there that could get this done. This is a particularly good place to spend transportation alternatives program funds as well as recreational trail program funds. Both of those are an 80-20 match, 80% federal, 20% local. At that sort of match rate, it means that not only could you look at sort of city funds to get something done, you could be looking at civic funds to get something done. That just a few civic dollars from different groups could go a long way in this park. I think there's a lot of potential out there. One of the things that this sort of plan starts to hit, I'll just sort of jump into presenting some of the information. The idea that a lot of people, when they say WNOD, the next thing they say is trail. But really this plan is talking about the WNOD park. That the trail is 8 feet wide, but the park is 100 feet wide. And when you look at it, I think a lot of people wouldn't realize that. In fact, within the city, this is the second largest park area by size. The only thing that's bigger is the playing fields at the schools. So this is bigger than Cherry Hill. This is bigger than Big Chimneys. I mean, this is a big park for the city. It's about 16 acres in size. And so the trail and the park that surrounds it could be doing a lot more than it is today. That people think of it as a place for recreation and exercise. They go walking, they go running. It's a transportation sort of feature within the city. It's a connection to other jurisdictions. It's a connection to metro stations. It also does other things. It provides environmental benefits. There's tree canopy. There could be more, especially with the removal of invasive species. There could be more habitat for native species. It could perhaps do something to affect water quality. And then also there's a potential for economic development. When the CACT first started getting interested in the WNOD, they surveyed trail users and they said, what's one thing you want? And the trail user said, we want to know how to get into the city. We can't figure it out from the trail. It's just too hard. because what the city goes over is a giant bridge. There's a fence that prevents me from entering the city from the bridge. As you approach the West End Plaza, there's a fence, and then when you're on the other side, there's not much there. You sort of descended down into single-family land, and so how would you know where to go? The Sharrows were an attempt along Park and Maple and Little Falls to try and get people into downtown, to sort of open up that route for folks. But there's certainly more that could be done. Park history. This section will get filled in as sort of the planning effort goes forward. There's some information that can be pulled already from sort of the draft West Broad Street plan about how it was originally a railroad service, and that led to a lot of the development of the city. There was almost a disaster where VDOT bought the land and was going to run 66 along it. That didn't happen. Instead, the city ended up with these giant power lines, which aren't the best, but they're a lot better than an interstate from sort of a community character standpoint. And so that's sort of the history, and then what does the city want, right? If that's what happened to the park in the past, what does the city want it to be in the future? And so this is the idea of thinking about it as more than just a trail. So make it a park and make it a prized park within the city. This is a park that is highly accessible to a lot of people within the city. It can provide people park access where they might not otherwise have it. And so the idea, this draft vision statement, which everything in this draft is up for sort of discussion and editing, but it's to develop the W&OD Park as a great street and greenway within the city, a place that provides opportunities for recreation, relaxation, and transportation while preserving and improving the environment and connecting and relating to the city's residential neighborhoods and commercial districts. This is also a great tool, this W&OD Trail, for making that conversation in land uses about how do the residential districts in the city relate to the commercial districts in the city. And so there are some design strategies that go along with that, using boundary landscaping to help people identify where does the park stop and where do people's backyards begin. That I don't want to feel like I'm in someone's backyard just because I fell off the trail, or I had to move off the trail to get out of someone's way. I should feel comfortable that I'm in a public space up until the point where I'm not. And then is there a potential to include lighting? Arlington has automated counters, and in the summer months, there are over 1,000 trips a day that are crossing the Arlington Falls Church line near East Falls Church. And in the winter months, that drops to, gosh, it's somewhere in sort of the mid sort of hundreds, so something in like the 400 to 500 range. Some of that has to do with weather, but a lot of it has to do with light. That when it gets dark at 5 p.m., the park may be open, but how would you use it?
And Herndon's put in lights along their
Herndon recently installed, Herndon installed lights along a portion of their trail. Now, some of this takes a long time. It took Herndon 15 years to do that. That was in their CIP. Now, part of that is because the policy door was close to them, that for a long time the park closed at dusk. Now it closes at 9 p.m. So there's an opportunity to light the park. Widening the trail to 20 feet. This is one of the more heavily used sections of the trail, and Nova Parks is already looking at widening the trail between the W&OD overpass all the way down to Columbia Pike.
That would be a good idea.
And if that makes sense for the city, we've certainly heard in our own planning sort of discussions that people want separate trails, they want a wider trail. We can put that in here. And then this idea of sort of highlighting and daylighting streams within the park. A lot of the parks, especially 4 Mile Run, it's either underground or it's this weird sort of thing that's running along the fire station. So is there a way to take advantage of that and turn it into something more than it is today? And then also highlighting that the park, as it goes through the city, is actually the continuous thing, and the streets are the things that should have to sort of navigate through it, not the other way around, that the park should have to sort of tiptoe across the street. So what should that park look like as it goes along the entire length of the city? Are there ways to sort of narrow the street so that people aren't parking their cars sort of along the side of the park, limiting visibility? Are there ways to sort of make the landscaping in a way sort of continuous so that you feel like the park is the linear element, not the streets? And then sort of park elements, this idea of sort of nodes and connections. So where the street and the park come together, is that a place where you can focus sort of activity? That's what the sort of plaza concept that was developed with sort of some guidance from the CACT and sort of building on their ideas of sort of concentrated activity. But in between there, leaving that open as sort of a natural environment. As I've taken this idea for a couple years on the road, groups like the Friends of the WNOD say, we really like the natural landscaping. Let's maintain that. We can do that in between these plazas, and so you've got this nice mix of sort of, this is where I go and hang out with people, this is where I can go for just sort of a pleasing walk and be in a natural environment. And so there are lots of things that could be included along the trail, things like benches, shade, bike repair stations, but also places for people to go and recreate, maybe things that they want but don't want to build in their own yards, things like bocce courts and horseshoe pits. Those are things people might want access to. And then additional uses that could be used in these natural areas, things like tree nurseries could set up, community gardens are popular. I was talking to the city arborist, and she explained why community gardens are so popular even in residential districts. People like tree canopy, but gardens don't do well in that situation. And so the idea is, in a place like the WNOD, where the power lines are going to limit what you can do with tree canopy anyway, is that a place where you can put a community garden? And sort of take advantage of your limitations, provide sort of that sunny area where people couldn't otherwise get it. And so then the idea that's sort of thrown out is this, on this map, is sort of this punctuation of the trail along the way with plazas and street crossings, and then some of the plazas are fairly sort of small ticket items in the range of, say, $100,000 a plaza. At 80-20 funding with some throw-in from the civic sort of world, that price tag starts to come down pretty quickly for the city taxpayers. And then longer term items that could be looked at as a potential sort of rerouting the WNOD trail over by Route 29. Currently it crosses Lee Highway. Is there a potential to bring a crossing down into North Washington Street? That's a way to further connect the WNOD to economic opportunities in the city. It's also a potential to get a grade separated crossing, either by going under the street, there may not be enough room for that, or going over the street as was done on Route 7. And then sort of ideas of what would happen. So this idea of sort of developing sort of a standard landscaping cross-section. This is not the finished product. The idea behind the power lines is to call out that those are a really big deal. The bases are actually quite small, and so there's actually an amenity space underneath the lines, but there is an easement that prohibits canopy cover from encroaching into it. And so through this sort of conceptual drawing, we can show what that would look like. Crossings, doing something like this sort of special crossing where you raise the crossing so that people who are on the trail have sort of a continuous ride. As I said, it's sort of the people who are going through the park or cutting across it that would have the slower ride. And then what would some of those plazas look like? And a lot of it is sort of taking advantage of what's already there. And I think these slides have come to the Planning Commission before. The idea of taking advantage of that storage shed, building it up with additional seating, maybe some public art, bike repair stations, making it a place where people actually want to sort of stop and visit and feel like they're welcome.
Maybe that's the place for the bathrooms. Maybe that's the place for the bathrooms.
That's certainly a possibility. I think we'd have to look at sort of what would it mean to have the bathrooms there versus somewhere else. But that's certainly something we could explore. This is a concept that's been floating around for a long time, but it sounds like there was some back and forth about whether this is the right scale or the right location, and sort of how does this relate to the land uses around it? What does this mean for Park Avenue? I think one of the concepts that was originally thought here is that today Park Avenue is designated as a great street within the city. On the eastern end, it has a very nice terminated view by the State Theater. So when you're on Park and you look in that direction, you feel a sense of place and enclosure because there's something there that makes a statement. The same thing was done with Little Falls Street with the main entrance to the Harris Teeter, that when you stand on that street, after that building's developed, you'll see something at the end, there will be a destination. That's often a problem when you've got only these grid of streets. Often it can just lead to this sort of interminable look down this canyon. So putting something at the end of Park, like a plaza or a structure, gives people a sense that they're not just falling off the street, they're actually going to a place. So that was one of the original ideas here. Walter Mess Plaza, using this as an opportunity to sort of dress up what's already been done, make a stronger connection to the American Legion, which is offered to open up their space when their building is open for people to use the facilities there, highlighting that, notifying people that that's an option, then also providing a space where you can tell the story about Walter Mess. You can also provide a board for community information, things that can happen there. Great Falls, again, this is sort of taking what's there, recognizing sort of what's the effect people are going for, sort of seating in a shaded area and sort of maybe a place to gather or sit. And so is that something that could be built upon? So add more shade, and then maybe add some activities, maybe some tables with some built-in checkerboards or chessboards. Just something that is not a loud use, it's just something that maybe is a place people can go and relax. And then on the eastern side of the city, the Veterans Common that's there today. And again, all these designs, this is the beauty of a draft document, is that they're not final. And so what would this look like? What are the elements that various boards and commissions are looking for, in particular the Planning Commission tonight? And how could this be used to provide a place that people can come and enjoy? And I think a lot of this trail is sort of, it's about sort of these great street concepts in the city. So Broad, Washington, Park, Maple, the WNOD. These are all places where people can go and they can walk and they can meet their neighbors and they can see people and they can enjoy the outdoors. This is an opportunity for the city to invest in a public space that's available for everyone. I think the city has a lot of investment in its private spaces, but not as much in its public spaces. And so how can the city sort of open up those avenues for people to get outside and enjoy the city with each other? And then the implementation section, which also would be completed, it makes a call out to grant funding opportunities, as I mentioned, 80-20 splits. And then maybe calling these things out on sort of a, for purposes of sort of planning and grant acquisition is, grant application is sort of calling these out on a light item. So maybe in the CIP, the city focuses on a couple of plazas this year, or they focus on maybe a couple sections of trail. The idea is to do it sort of one piece at a time, so that one, you can defer the cost over multiple groups that are using the trail, but two, you make these sort of sections that the city can bite off and implement instead of looking at the whole project, which may be too big. And then just for backup, there are some maps in here, one from the adopted Parks for People plan, which calls for using this as a grade street, the WNOD, and then providing parks and plazas along it. And then the bike master plan, which calls for separate trails along the WNOD, the use of plazas, creating a new grade street. And both of these things also call for that sort of direct connection between the WNOD and Crossman Park across 29.
Good ideas.
Okay, so here are my quick comments. And I defer to Russ, and so I mean one of these as a question. There are too many plazas. You know, I spend a lot of time on the WNOD trail from Percival all the way down into Shirlington. And I will tell you that most people, with a few exceptions, are not there to sit at plazas. Most people are walking or riding or walking their dog, even if they're walking slow. And so I think that there's a limited, you don't have that much span here for all these plazas, although they're all lovely and potentially good ideas. I mean, they're just, I don't know. I would rather see the resources to more connection points to, it's hard to get to the WNOD trail from parts of the city. And so I would think that that would be a much greater use of the resource. I would have some questions, particularly after tonight, that there's really a screaming need for whether it's bathrooms or places to get water or places like that. I mean, I think if you look at it from, let's say, mile marker 0 up through, call it 7, that's right at the bridge. There's kind of a lot of places to get water, and there's there's a bunch of you got a lot of stops along that part of it. Beyond there, there's the trail, so you cross Shreve Road Hill, and there's a bathroom and stuff there in the park at the top of the hill.
Porta potty. Yeah.
That works.
No, it does, but
There's two of them?
I'm counting the steps.
And then it's kind of a long way after that, right? So I don't see that. I'm just be a little curious about the future need. Maybe I don't know. I'm not seeing that. The point of the story is I would really like to see, if we had X amount of dollars and could get X more, as when it came here, this safe routes to school. I mean, I think what we were thinking is this is a terrific opportunity to connect the trail back in to the neighborhoods that are hard. It's very hard to get to the trail, and there are no sidewalks. So I would think that would be the highest and best use. That's all I got.
I agree with you on the plazas, because I knew about some of these, but I didn't know about like one at North Spring, and it's so close to Walter Mess and Weston Grove. It didn't make sense to me. I guess, I also know that we're not going to do all of these right away, and if we were going to do some, we would pick specific ones. But it seems to me if we had Veterans Commons and Walter Mess and something either at the Western Entrance or Weston Grove, that would be enough. I don't know what we need all these other Great Falls and North Spring, for example. In terms of bathrooms, the only place that's easy to get to a bathroom is Weston Grove, and that's if you're willing to go across the street and buy something in Mike's Deli. I mean, I'm just being frank. I mean, if you have kids, yeah, I know that I can come off at Great Falls and head in and buy something in some store there to get to a bathroom. But if you don't know the city, you may not know that you can go up Little Falls and find a Starbucks or something like that. I just say this from being on this trail with Cub Scouts. And you're right about one thing. Once you leave the city and you're heading to Vienna, you're pretty much, luckily, have boys with you and there's bushes, because you're done until you get to Vienna. But in the city itself, I mean, I'm trying to think. The only place I know of that's close now is Mike's Deli. We used to do the McDonald's stop before that was taken out for the Rite Aid. But I don't know. I just think it would be nice if there was at least one facility with bathrooms somewhere on the trail in the city. Or signage saying where you could find facilities.
Yeah, I
like
mean,
signage up to the library or the community center or something.
You could talk me into one. I mean, but so it'd be Bon Air Park out to the edge of the city. I mean,
right.
So that'd be the issue.
No, we usually
but I mean, it's just there's a lot of plazas on there.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, from someone who's we always started in the city or on the edge of the city. We never started in Arlington when we were going to Vienna, but. I don't know. Or we go from the city to Shirlington, and then you do have some better choices.
Okay, Russ.
Well, maybe there's a few too many plazas mentioned on this map, but there's needed a place for you to stop. Definitely to use the restroom, but also when you're running or biking or walking, I think it's nice to stop. And the plans that are in here, I don't think are overly ambitious. That a little bricked area that says, "Hey, let's stop and congregate." I have less problem with that than it sounds like the other commissioners. This is a 2-mile stretch through the city. I don't think it's going to take a lot of investment dollars to sort of define Falls Church on this incredibly well-traveled road or great street, we're calling it. I think it's just been neglected for far too long. At the last CIP, I know I was fairly outspoken and said we should put $200,000 of the water fund, the water proceeds towards this because of the matching. I still firmly stand by that and disagree with the council's decision on that, because I think $200,000 with the matching that's available here, and we've heard people come by from Nova saying that they're willing to put money into this trail, and if you come up with a good idea and a good funding plan, that they'll help you with the funding. There's money to be accessed on this, what I consider a great street. I think it's appropriately named in this presentation. And I think a little bit of investment could make this just something special that allows us to define Falls Church for an enormous population that's going through there. Right now you pass through, and I think sort of the only defining quality is these, what I think are actually total wastes, are these exercise spots. There's a few people doing some pull-ups, but that's about the extent of it. I've never seen anybody use the stationary bike, ever. But so to replace those spots with places where people can aggregate, I am all for it. After hearing the comments tonight, and we've heard them before, I think maybe the bathroom's not the right spot at the intersection right by the Mason Row proposal, but I do think that the storage shed has a lot of opportunities. Every time I pass it, I'm like, oh, there's probably a bathroom here, and there never is. It's just like a big tease for those needs. And I'm not sure we're storing there. But otherwise, I really like the plan, and I think with a little bit of city initiative to say this is a priority for us, as it should be, the funding can be raised pretty simply. And I do think the CIP is some place to consider it.
And some civic organizations, too.
One of the things that I remembered, and I think it was you saying, was that when you go, no, I guess it was Keith, going over the bike trail, you can't get down. I mean, going over the bridge over Route 7, you can't get down into Falls Church easily. I remember being on Planning Commission or AAB, one of the two, when we approved that bike plan, and that was one of the things that we talked about, making sure that people could get off that and down into the city and use our, buy sandwich or whatever. So I'm really, I guess I don't use the trail enough, but I go the other way. Anyway, I think that that's something that could be done. To be helpful. I was at the Mad Fox, and I was also at a new coffee shop that's down on down by Chasing Tails. I guess it's Westmoreland, Westmoreland. And both times, huge groups of bicyclists came in, and they tied up, and they were in Mad Fox. It just seems to me we should have some signage or something that shows how to get to some of our places that
lots
would
of
welcome.
bikers at Mad Fox.
Yeah, I mean, there were maybe 15 the other day when I was having lunch, and there were, I would say, 10 at this new little coffee shop. Just came in, had something to eat, and got on their bikes and went off. So I think that that's something that we're missing as far as promoting Falls Church, and I'd like to see that happen.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, with your indulgence, I would like to just speak to the idea of a special feature at Weston Grove. This has turned into kind of a bathroom debate, which is not what it was really intended to be. It's the one place where the trail hits commercial parts of the city. And so it's one place where you have that intersection of a very heavily traveled pedestrian and bicycle place that connects and intersects with one of our business areas. Whether the plan that's in front of Planning Commission and Council that's going to be working its way through this fall gets approved or not, there will be change there from what is there presently. And one of the things in looking at the rest of the trail, and this was really inspired to some extent by the CACT chairman, who looked from beginning to end, was how lacking the city was in terms of the features. And we went out and took kind of our own inventory as well of what are the places, what other communities have in terms of railroad features or memorabilia or pieces of that railroad history. And really, the city has none. In Arlington, they've got a number of pieces, cabooses, and other kinds of things. In Vienna, they have their train station, a Civic Plaza. They have a bike shop and other things around there. It's a real location, which creates a lot of civic interest. In Herndon, the same thing has been done, right near City Hall, near a bike shop, near the ice cream store, near their library. And Purcellville, in particular, has done a beautiful job with their station, where they have a comfort station, they have their Chamber of Commerce group, Loudon group, restaurants, bike shops, a plaza, Wi-Fi. And you can watch and see how the people who use these areas use these places. Part of the thought here was, could we, with a simple building, recreate something that would let people know that there had been a railroad heritage here in the city? And we had one of the simplest buildings that was a station, the West Station, very simple, just classic, simple structure, board and batten. And you can see it in the historic pictures. Now, what's in that could be a range of things, from, you know, a history location or a bike shop. In suggesting things, one of the questions was, well, what is the need? And you know, it's very difficult for someone to, there's no ADA bathroom that I know of on the trail that's accessible. We're building a very nice park that's going to open soon at the West End. And presently, so one thought had been shifting it closer to that might provide that opportunity to help serve that city park in the future. But that's not you know, something like that doesn't have to go in this building. It's more a question of, are there facilities that could go in a building like this to help create a place that connect you to the business part of the city and help let people know about the history of the railroad and its importance here in the city. How many people in the city know about Camp Alger, which had 30,000 people, soldiers camped, you know, right outside the city, getting ready for the Spanish-American War? I mean, it was a big part of this town, and so there's nothing here, though, to let you know that, except some faded old historic markers that were done, you know, a few decades ago. So I just think for a town that values history, the absence of anything here in the city was kind of astounding to me, and it seemed like this was an opportunity to recreate something at this historic location that let people know there was a train that used to come through here, and people came and got on and off, and freight came, and houses probably got loaded off in packages and built in the city, and troops came and left, and we just don't know that anymore. You couldn't find that unless you really look hard here in the city. And so it just seemed like a missed opportunity, or an opportunity to create a place at a key location where you have this intersection of this important pedestrian bicycle railroad regional park and the city's commercial core.
Okay, we about done?
Anyone? Anything? Okay. Work session adjourned.